Greetings, friends. My name is Louis Butcher, and I'm very pleased and honored today to be a part of our inaugural podcast concerning a very important issue. We are part of a group that has been chronicling the history of the 7th Ward of Lancaster, Pennsylvania between the years of 1930 and 1980. And we have titled our project, Discovering Our Treasures in the 7th Ward. And it is our hope that we can capture the very vital and vibrant experiences that took place, both by talking about the institutions and organizations as well as the very fine people that live there. It's my pleasure to introduce the project manager and kind of the driving force for this initiative, Ms. Elizabeth Ford, and I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about the project. May I call you Liz or
Please
Elizabeth?
Do.
Yeah.
Elizabeth,
okay, great.
if you don't mind.
I don't.
Thank you so much. Once again, this is such an exciting opportunity. How this project came about is several years ago, 8+ years ago, I was having a conversation with my brother Ron Ford in his kitchen, and we were trying to figure out ways that we could capture the vitality and the successes that emerged from the 7th Ward from our childhood. So much of the experiences from our memory was negative about living in this culturally diverse but yet primarily African American community in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we wanted to be able to share the wealth of successes. So my brother came up with the idea of the pictorial wall that displays successful businesses and individuals in the 7th Ward and is now being displayed at Crispus Attucks Center. Because I am more of a direct people person, I wanted to interview heroes, the unsung heroes from this community, and give them an opportunity to share their stories from their perspectives. So I initially had a conversation with Pastor Butcher and Leroy Hopkins about their concept, whether this was a workable concept. And as it turned out, that both of them, as well as Betty Hurdle, had been thinking about doing the same kind of project. So it was a natural coalition. It was a natural fit for this beginning group of individuals who grew up in the neighborhood to come together, share their expertise, and to begin this storytelling experience about the 7th Ward. And how we came about is we identified friends that we knew. And our initial team consisted of Lou Butcher, Leroy Hopkins, Gerald Wilson, Betty Hurdle, Shirley Jones, and myself. And we are blessed to have been together over 8 years, just quietly but yet systematically doing our work to log into and capture individual stories. And through this podcast, we would like to have many of the individuals that we've interviewed through the years verbalize their stories so you can pick up the excitement that we picked up as well. We feel that this project is meeting a unique need within the community. We are the forgotten group, if you will, and to be able to create a platform where each individual can share their stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, from their perspective, which made this community a thriving place to live. Thank you.
I think you'll agree, Elizabeth, and thank you for your expertise in talking about how this all came together. And I believe that Buddy Glover and Deb Davis are part of the group. Maybe you've mentioned them. One of the things that you've already highlighted is the fact that there's been a negative connotation on the 7th Ward for many years. It's been called the ward, and that was not something, it was not a badge of honor. That was a divisive label that was not conducive to inspiring young people who were doing the best they could to be successful. And despite all the things that were going on through the Depression years, through the World War II years, Korea, Vietnam, and so forth, people thrived, people were successful. And it is our hope that by sharing not only our own experiences, but the experiences, as you mentioned, of many who have lived in the 7th Ward, that we'll be able to point out the fact that many, many heroic people, certainly our treasurers, have come from the neighborhoods that encompass the 7th Ward. Other people may also think that ethnically it's been a monolith, but as you pointed out, it's been ethnically diverse, and sometimes there have been waves of different cultures that have come through, but all of them have contributed to the mosaic that is the 7th Ward. Well, you and your family have certainly made their mark in not only the 7th Ward, but in Lancaster and far beyond. And I think it would be fitting in this inaugural podcast to have you talk about some of the things that have been important for you. So if you don't mind, can you tell me how your family came to Lancaster? Were you always here, or what's been your experience there?
Well, it's been a wonderful opportunity for growth for me. My family originated in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and when my father married my mother, the former Viola Ewell, they set up housekeeping in a community called Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. At the age of 3, my father decided he had better job opportunities by moving his family to Lancaster. And so in essence, I consider Lancaster my hometown because I've been here since I was 3 years old. We initially moved into my grandfather Ewell's home in the 400 block of South Christian Street. My grandfather was a veteran of the wars and had lost a leg, but had a mind that was absolutely phenomenal. And he used to tell us the most exciting and almost scary stories about what it was like to even be a slave in Virginia, and how education was the key to moving from where you were to where you want to be. I attended Rygart Elementary School, but during those days, kindergarten was a half-day experience. And I was proud to have my 6'2" grandfather with one leg walk me to and from my school experience at Rygart Elementary, all the way up until I was in 4th grade there. It's a great story. And the area where you lived, you said on South Christian Street, that's a very vibrant area. Tell us a little bit about your neighbors and what it was like living in that block. It was a very upbeat experience. Across the street from my grandfather's home, there was a Christian church
The South Christian Street Mennonite Church, right?
And there was a Mennonite church on the lower end of our block that always held the most exciting vacation Bible school experiences for those in the neighborhood. Directly across the street from my grandfather's home was Siegel's grocery store, which the store was owned and operated by Russian Jews. And we became close friends. The daughters, Rona and Glenda, we grew up together, we played together, but yet there were still differences because of our ethnicity and religions. But I did have an opportunity to go inside the synagogue, which was a critical building in the community, because this particular Jewish family, they moved into the neighborhood because they needed to be able to walk to their synagogues on Saturdays. And that was an exciting experience for an African American Baptist child to observe. Some of my childhood neighbors were Alice Toombs, and I think her father owned a garage. He was one of the first entrepreneurs.
Yes, had a service station up on Chester Street.
And then we had the Gantz family, that they lived directly across the street from us, and Mrs. Gant was celebrated as a community leader by having her mural painted on the property that used to house my grandfather's house. Some of my childhood friends were Carol Hyson, Alice Wilson, Rona Siegel, just lots of young, exciting people to be around. And we did all of the childhood things, playing in each other's houses, playing with dolls, telling stories, reading stories. The thing that struck me the most, that reading was a critical part of our growing up experience, even back in the 50s.
Now you went to Rygart. Tell me just a little bit about the Rygart experience there in that school.
Rygart Elementary was a small school that was located at the end of my street, North Street and Strawberry, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Chester and Strawberry.
And I remember my kindergarten teacher was a very tall German woman who believed in no-nonsense learning, but yet she was exceedingly loving. Back in those days, the kindergarten experience was a half a day, and my grandfather, Yule, used to walk me to my kindergarten class and then would be right there to pick me up. And I was so proud of that because he was over 6 feet tall, and we spent a great deal of time together as a young child growing up, and he came to all of my school events as well as my parents. So it was a very exciting experience.
Did you have any problems in the school at all? Or?
Yes, I think that was the first time I became aware that that I was different, because the school was predominantly white, and even though my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Birchfield, was a loving person, one could sense that there was a difference in how she interacted with the white students versus how she interacted with the few African American students in her class. And I think that was part of the reason why I was so driven to excel and attempt to achieve and exceed, because I heard a different story at home where I was valued for my uniqueness.
Now, you were somewhat unique at home because you had 9 brothers and you were the only female. You want to share a little bit about growing up in a home with 9 guys?
That was insane. Let me just put that out there. But my brothers were extremely protective. But as most siblings, we fought, but yet it was done in a loving way. My brothers excelled academically as well as in sports. And oftentimes my mother would insist that they take me with them to their games. So you can imagine how well that went over. But we used to also take treks down to the county park. And Mother would pack a big picnic lunch in a wicker basket and send us down to Williams Park, which is now the county park. And many times in the summer, we would spend all day down there playing hide and seek, exploring the woods. We used to go hunt for remnants of Native Americans in the park because they were plentiful in those days. There was a little small mountain there that we called Indian Rock, and that we used to climb it. And the other thing is, like, my brothers loved playing tricks on me. I'll never forget one day they took me to the cemetery on Strawberry Street and left me there at night.
Wow.
I, of course, was extremely dramatic as a child, and I just screamed and yelled, but they did come back for me eventually and take me home.
Wow. You said that you did visit a synagogue. I'm wondering, was your family religious? Was your family Christian? Tell me a little bit about any religious experience that you had.
Yes, my family, they were deeply religious. My father was a deacon at Ebenezer Baptist Church. He was also superintendent of Sunday school. So my mother was as a deaconess, and so our religious learning experiences played a critical role in my upbringing. My father insisted that every Wednesday night that we would have prayer meeting in our home. You had to be half dead to miss that experience. So we began to know that Christianity and God's Word played a critical role in our upbringing. There's never a meal that passed our lips where prayer wasn't said first.
They had prayer in school back in those days too, didn't they?
Yes, and that we used prayer in school. We had the Pledge Allegiance to the flag, and it all, to me, helped strengthen the sense of community.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about your after-school experience? Did they have activities at the school, or did you have to go somewhere else for that?
Back in the 50s, we did not necessarily have activities after school because during that period, family was the center of community life. But not only that, we were very fortunate to be very active in our church. The church that we attended as children was Ebenezer Baptist Church under the guidance of Reverend Mapp and his wife, Mrs. Mapp, who developed an extremely comprehensive youth program that wore us out. But it wore us out with fun. Every week we would go on hay rides. This is all centered around the church. We would even have dances in the basement of the church. At Halloween, we would go dunking for apples and dress up in our Halloween clothes. We put on plays at the church, where every child was encouraged to do his or her best, whether it was doing a script or doing playing a musical instrument. And also we had the very active Crispus Attic Center. My mother signed me up for every project that and program that center offered. And oftentimes I would say, Mother, I'm exhausted. Can I just stay home? No, go out and get involved.
This is the one over on Howard Avenue?
On Howard Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And so we learned, I was fortunate to learn how to be an effective but yet productive young lady. We used to, Mrs. Jackson used to hold deportment classes so that we would learn how to conduct ourselves at home as well as in public as well-educated young ladies. I took tap dancing lessons, piano lessons, jazz lessons. I learned to paint at Crispus Attucks. So anything possible that would help enrich my life experience as a child, we were able to engage in at Crispus Attucks Center as well as our church.
Good. Before we move away from the neighborhoods in which you lived, would you consider that there was a sense of community there? Did families know each other? Was there an interaction among the families on your streets?
That was one of the most unique experiences that I draw back on as an adult. There was a real sense of community in the 7th Ward. Most families knew everyone. When our little gang would be out after, let's say, after dinner, and we would always congregate on somebody's porch or in front of Hattie's sub shop or various places, or Blum's soda shop, and we would sing, and oftentimes into the wee hours of the night, and then you would hear a resounding noise in the community. Okay, Lou, it's time to come home. Elizabeth, it's time to come home. All down the line. And then when you didn't obey, believe me, there were parents and elders within our community that would remind us that it was time to go home. Mm-hmm. We used to have, in the summertime, block parties where people would just get together and sing and dance and share food. We would have, during the Christmas season, you could hear carolers going to the neighborhood's homes mm-hmm. and singing Christmas carols. I missed that so much. Mm-hmm. And then at Halloween was a big to-do in the 7th Ward because everybody dressed up in whatever they could dress up. Many of the costumes were homemade, but we would take shopping bags and going trick-or-treating to doors and come home with the bags loaded with candy and fruit and things of that sort. But our church, Ebenezer, also participated in that experience by holding a Halloween party each year where we would dunk for apples and that we could create stories about what Halloween meant to us. And then the stories were actually shared with the adults in our congregation.
There was even a parade back in those days, downtown, a Halloween parade.
That's exactly right, and that was exciting to walk down Duke Street to go to downtown and absolutely observe that. And there's another experience that I remember vividly, and that was our local Elks would have its annual parade, and that was something to behold. We would have marching bands, drummers, musicians walking down the streets of the 7th Ward, Duke Street, Dolphin Street, displaying a sense of community and unity. And everybody would turn out and line up the streets, sitting on the curbs, trying to find the best spot. You'd go early, trying to find the best spot to sit so that you could observe the marching bands and celebrate youth once again.
Yes. Now, you moved up to, did you say the 500 block of South Christian Street. Now, as you moved into your teen years, did you have jobs after school? Tell me a little bit about what happened there.
Okay, when we were just so amazed at our parents that with a gazillion children and my father was always a laborer, that they were able to purchase a home for us. And we moved into the 500 block of South Christian Street, and I, as an impressionable young girl, thought, my dad must be wealthy for us to move into such a glorious house. The community was even more diverse in this particular block, and so one of the streets that was facing our home on South Christian was Woodward, and Woodward Street had a predominance of other ethnic groups living there. I got to interact with Italians, with Germans, and once again some Russian Jews, and that lit up a whole new idea of life for me. The community was well maintained, tree-lined streets. Everybody that we knew was outreaching to all families, and you really felt safe there in that environment.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any role models or people that you really looked up to as you were growing up, perhaps in your teen years?
Boy, did I. I was fortunate to grow up with a lot of progressive young African-American professional women. One of my best role models was Julia Means. She was a professional, she was a college graduate, and she is the one who also motivated me to join a sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And she was always willing to spend time with me, to give me guidance and direction. And another neighborhood individual that I love was Mrs. Curry. She was the mother of 5 daughters, but she was the first African American Catholic that I had ever met. And her daughters and I became close friends, and in fact, our project has highlighted one of her daughters who has since passed away as Dr. Bobby Curry, a PhD from Princeton University, who also was a graduate advisor to Joe Biden's wife. Wow, what a community.
She grew up on the same street as you, right?
As the same street, on the same street, yes.
Yes. Well, I know that your family has always been stalwarts in our community, and they were always willing to, and are today, willing to tackle problems and difficulties. And so I believe you were growing up during the Civil Rights Movement, which had its tentacles in Lancaster as well as the rest of the country. Can you tell me anything about your involvement in the Civil Rights Movement, why it was necessary, if you were, and how conditions in Lancaster were before, and how they may have changed because of civil rights?
Thank you so much for this question. We were fortunate to have Bethel AME Church in our community, and that environment really set the pace of informing youth as well as our elders about the civil rights movement. We were fortunate to have a Reverend Steffens, who was pastor at Bethel AME Church during that time, and he spent a great deal of time in training us. These on how to behave when we went on marches. This was a very contentious time in Lancaster. Restaurants would not serve us. Swimming pools would not open their doors to us. We were restricted on where we could shop, where we could eat, and oftentimes even where we could educate ourselves. So Reverend Steffens really informed us, trained us on how to attend to the issues that were facing us during this period. I was fortunate to participate in the march against Rocky Springs Park, who would accept our money when the doors were open for different picnics and parades at the facility, but they refused to open the doors to allow our children to swim there. So we had a protest march that was led by Reverend Steffens and many in the community. And I was about 16 years old then and was participating in that march against Rocky Springs. And we actually had rocks thrown at us by whites. We had people spitting on us, white families. So we needed to be trained on how to respond to that and not react to it, which could have been detrimental to our health.
I remember that I believe you were in the news, one of the news photos as a part of the march. So your involvement is indelible. It'll always be remembered because it was captured in the newspapers.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. A lot of, as you pointed out, many of the institutions in Lancaster had what was called, I would say, de facto segregation. Legally, they couldn't keep African Americans out, but by their policies and by the way they treated folks, it was evident that people of color were not welcome in those institutions. And you were to be commended, along with a lot of other young people, in helping to make those changes and turn things around in a community that, from a distance, looked very equitable and full of equality. But when you got close up, you found out that people could not get good jobs. They couldn't serve as sales clerks in some of the downtown stores and so forth. And so during those times, you're right, it was contentious, but because of the actions of persons like yourself and those role models, things did change. Did you have a job here in Lancaster at any time as you were growing up?
Well, while I was in school, it was important for my parents' firm belief that education had to come first. So I did not have a job per se in high school, but I did babysit a lot. My first job, though, after I graduated from high school, was ironically at the Republican headquarters here in Lancaster, where I was hired as a clerk typist. And that gave me the opportunity to work and save because my parents did not have the resources to pay for my college tuition. So I worked for a year before I went away to college and was able to be self-supportive, as well as have been blessed with some scholarships to help me with that.
This community called the 7th Ward, tell me some of the things that you liked about it, liked living, enjoyed about it while you were living there, and also some of the things that were discouraging and some of the things you did not like.
Mm-hmm. What I enjoyed mostly was a sense of feeling safe. And why I say that's important is remembering this time, my experience was from the 40s onward. And going to predominantly white schools, I did not always feel safe or if I truly belonged. And so when I would walk home from George Washington Elementary School and later from McCaskey High School, there was such a sense of peace and serenity when I crossed over Dick Street and was in my own home environment. Walking down the street, having people recognize me by name, and the reverse is also true. Going into people's homes and feeling welcome. And once again, it was reciprocal. You would hear adults call your name. Elizabeth, how was school today? Can you imagine how that must have felt for an African American young lady who sometimes was never even called on to respond to answers in the classroom experience? So I grew up feeling very loved, very secure, and I think the community also planted a seed that it was okay to take risk for me.
What did you do for entertainment after places like Crispus Attucks? Were there other opportunities for you to go to plays or clubs, or what did kids do, or what did you do for entertainment?
Now, we were very fortunate to have every summer the county playgrounds would have dances on the weekends, and I loved dancing. So myself and my girlfriends, there were 5 of us that were inseparable. We used to come home on Friday and maybe meet at each other's homes to figure out what we were going to wear Saturday to the park dances. And so that was just exciting and just full of fun and revelry, and it really planted a seed that despite the challenges that we may face during the day in other communities like our school or even the work environment, that we had a safe place where we could interact with each other and be ourselves and just laugh and have a good time. Also, Crispus Attucks often had theme dances that they would conduct and hold throughout the school year. And also, now I don't want to negate this, that our elementary school and junior high, particularly at Edward Hand Junior High, they used to have May Day activities. And that really gave me an opportunity, even though I was not athletically prone, but coming from a household of predominant males, that I actually learned that I could actually run a race and win it. So I was very grateful for the May Day experiences, and we would dance around the flagpole and celebrate the physical awareness that each member of the community brought to the school.
Were there any professionals, were there any doctors, dentists, people like that in the community, that people of color in those days, do you remember?
Oh, yes. We were very fortunate. My first primary care physician was Dr. Edward Copper. He actually, can you imagine this, did home or house visits. I'll never forget that I had appendicitis one day, and Dr. Copper actually came to our home and treated me. It was the most magnificent experience I'd ever had. And then we had Dr. Robinson, who was, I think, a podiatrist.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then we had a dentist in our community.
Dr. Travis.
Dr. Travis. And so we were very, very fortunate to have well-trained, well-educated professionals who provided services to the African American community for many, many, many years. And were actively involved in the community as well.
What was the music like in those days in the 7th Ward?
It was rocking. We were fortunate enough to have such talent that emerged from the community. As you heard me speak earlier, that it was nothing in the summertime to hear groups singing on the corners, a cappella, doing bebop?
Doo-wop.
Doo-wop music. And as a person who loved dancing and just loved almost every kind of music available, I thrived on this. We had groups like the Crystaliers. We had there was a group of males, youth, that was headed by Lou Butcher in those days, called the Gospel Monarchs, singing Christian songs throughout, but upbeat songs. So we just had music everywhere, and it was very exciting.
Well, Elizabeth, from all that I have heard and experienced, the 7th Ward during that time period was not an affluent place. Many of the families had fairly low-paying jobs, if they were able to have jobs at all. And facing all of the challenges and adversity of growing up in that area, we know statistically and personally that many young people have become very successful, become educators, professionals of various kinds, and even those that perhaps are not considered professionals have been good moral people who have taken care of their families and have made something of themselves. Why do you think that is?
That's a very intriguing question. I think there are multiple responses to that. I think because there was a clear sense of family. I think because the majority of the people wanted better for their children than they had experienced and were not afraid to do whatever it took to achieve that goal. I think that the sense of real, authentic community just surpassed everything else, all of the negatives that we experienced beyond the 7th Ward.
It really did take a village, right?
It really did. It really did. And I think, too, that for the majority of the residents, that sense of Christian love, we had a variety of different churches and synagogues in our community. But on Sunday mornings, it was amazing how majority of the people were in some type of religious experience, whether it was the Bethlehem Church, whether it was Ebenezer Baptist Church, whether it was Ray's Temple, whether it was a synagogue, that there was a real sense of a being greater than themselves that was guiding and directing them.
In many respects, it's kind of unfortunate that young people today did not have the 7th Ward experience between the years of 1930 and 1980, and things have changed so dramatically now in a digital world. As we draw this interview to a close, is there anything you can share for parents and young people of today from your experiences that might help them to cope with what they're dealing with in these modern days?
Wow, that is a very, very powerful question, and one I contemplate on a regular basis. I think first and foremost, we need to reconnect as a family unit. Get to know who you are as an individual first and foremost. And then secondly, get to know who your family members are and support and direct them on the paths that they should take. And thirdly, get involved beyond self. It is amazing when you begin to put others first in your life, how much that brings out the best in you. So if I could offer anything to the young people and even to some of our elders and seniors today, it's not always about you, but it is about loving your neighbor as yourself.
Great. Now, all of our communities and all of our neighborhoods, both in the city and outside, are important. There's no question about that. But I think that the folks who still live in the 7th Ward or the ward can take heart in the fact that you can achieve, you can succeed. Things have changed a lot. It's far more diverse. Languages are different. Opportunities may be different. But if young people in particular take advantage of the educational opportunities, the interaction of the Christian and religious organizations, and the community-based agencies that are still in the 7th Ward, the future can be very bright, and they too can be considered treasures in that particular area. You think I'm right?
Well said.
Thank you.